As I said a few minutes ago, and we've been talking about all night, we were all shocked the week after my visit last in October to wake up to the devastating news of the attack on the Tree of Life Synagogue. The senseless and hate-filled attack shocked Jewish communities all over this country and all over the world. The national news was soon filled with stories of people just like us. People who went to shul on Shabbat, to pray, to learn, to be in community. And they were killed because of hate. Here in Juneau, we weren't spared from this loss. Multiple members of this community grew up in Squirrel Hill. They spent their childhoods walking the neighborhood's leafy streets. To them, the Tree of Life Synagogue, it wasn't a picture on the news, but a place that they passed by, a place where their friends and cousins went to pray, went to celebrate, and went to mourn. So in the days following the attack, they shared their reactions. They shared their pain and they shared their stories. They shared their memories about their experiences, but also about the people who lost their lives. And our community showed up to listen. A few days after the massacre, this sanctuary, this room was filled with people. People coming to show support and love for Barb and Sarah Lynn, and for the Tree of Life members who lost their lives and their families. But this community also showed up to stand up against acts of violence and to show that we are strong, to show that our love is stronger than acts of hate. In the words of Torah that we read together a few minutes ago, we read about another act of hate and an attempt to stand up to it. It's a story of Joseph and his brothers. The Torah says that Joseph's brothers hated him so much that they could not even speak one friendly word to him. Now, this kind of hatred, it doesn't happen immediately. It builds up over time. First, we learn that Joseph rats out his brothers to their father whenever they do something wrong. And as the favorite son, Joseph receives a beautiful ornamental tunic from his father Jacob, which makes his brothers jealous and hate him even more. Joseph also has an annoying habit of telling his brothers all about his dreams. In one dream, Joseph recounts to them, this is his most famous dream, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars. And coincidentally, Joseph has 11 brothers. So the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were all bowing down to Joseph. Seems like Joseph wasn't great at making friends. So one day, when Joseph and his brothers were all alone in the wilderness, his brothers decide to get rid of him once and for all. They come up with a plot to kill him, to take his tunic and to spread blood on him, and tell their father that Joseph was killed by a wild beast. This was their brother. But when Reuben, the oldest brother, heard his brother's plot, he tries to save Joseph. He suggests that they throw him into a pit so that at least Joseph's blood won't be on their hands. At first glance, at first listen, that doesn't really seem like a plot of salvation. It just seems like a plot of not doing the dirty work. But the Torah tells us, it says explicitly that Reuben's intent was to save Jacob. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, the former chief rabbi of Great Britain, he explains that Reuben planned on waiting until his brother's attention was elsewhere, until they were distracted, so that Reuben could return to the pit and save Joseph. But then Reuben, he leaves. We don't know why. The Torah doesn't tell us where he goes. But it does say that when he returns to Joseph's pit, he finds it empty. While he was gone, his brothers had sold Joseph. His brothers had taken Joseph out of the pit and sold him to some passing traders for 20 pieces of silver. Rabbi Sachs explains that Reuben, in that critical moment, quote, he did not have the capacity to carry through a course of action that he knew to be right. He begins well, but he doesn't drive the deed to closure. End quote. Reuben had stood up to hatred, to violence. He spoke out, but he didn't have the courage to be persistent. He wasn't steadfast. In the critical moment, Reuben was nowhere to be found. So even though he'd stood up to hatred once, he didn't show up when his voice, when his presence, and his defiance were needed. Let us learn from Reuben. Unfortunately, anti-Semitism is not going anywhere. It has, in fact, all the signs of strengthening. After Pittsburgh, this community stood up in love and support and in defiance. We stood up to say that we are Jews and we are not going anywhere. But Pittsburgh will not be the end of anti-Semitism in America. So let us learn from Reuben. Let us learn what happens when we are not steadfast, when we look away in the face of danger, and when we fail to persist in standing up and speaking out. It won't be easy, and there will be dark times of pain, of loss, and fear. But as much as we Jews have inherited a tradition of being castigated, of being hated, we've inherited an even greater tradition of resilience. Next week's holiday, Hanukkah, is the quintessential example of that resilience, of strength and resolve in the face of fear and danger. Hanukkah commemorates the victory of the Maccabees, who fought back against Jewish persecution. Against all odds, the Maccabees ultimately prevailed against the much larger Syrian army. The hero of that story, Judah Maccabee, was in fact killed before the Maccabees' ultimate victory. But still the Maccabees did not falter. They persisted. Hanukkah is known as the Festival of Lights. And those lights, the Shabbat lights, which we kindle every week, we keep them inside our homes, welcoming their warmth and the radiance into our presence. But the Hanukkah lights, it's traditional to put the Hanukkah lights, the Hanukkah menorah, in our windowsill, not in the inner parts of our home. We put them in our window to proclaim to the world, to proclaim to our neighbors, that the Jewish people have not been destroyed. And that is a miracle. We put them in our window to show that we have held fast, we have persisted for 3,500 years. And we are not going anywhere. Shabbat Shalom.